Hello, everyone. This is episode 12 of the Three Body Problem podcast. If you can believe it, Costin Raiu is on vacation this week. Actual vacation. This has become a running joke, but he's actually on vacation this week and will be missing the show. Nito is here. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, man. Just preparing for the LabsCon madness at this point. Try not to lose
Gabriel
anybody.
Bernadett-Shapiro is the third buddy this week. Gabe, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing really well, Ryan.
You're
Thank
also
you.
heading out to LabsCon to do
I
some
will be at
presentation
LabsCon. Yeah.
and workshop this week. But we pull you in to be a guest host on the podcast this week to talk about advancements in AI and AI security, generative AI. Big news out of OpenAI yesterday around what's the next version of ChatGPT. Can we jump right in there and just kind of give us a heads up, Gabe? Fill in the audience on what happened yesterday.
Yesterday, OpenAI made an announcement. They dropped a new model, which was GPT-4o1. And in that announcement, they made the claim that this is a new class of model that they're rolling out. And the big difference for this new class of model is that it's been trained in a slightly different way than their previous models. They've trained it on chain of thought reasoning, which is essentially, when they're doing asking the model like, hey, like we're going to give you this multi-step reasoning problem, and what we want is for you to explain all of your reasoning and then give us the answer. So they take a corpus of, several 100,000 or, I don't know, however many questions that require multi-step reasoning. And the interesting thing about the way they did this one is that the questions that they asked were all questions that language models are typically really bad at answering. And what I mean by that is there were questions from the domain of like mathematics or physics or chemical engineering, questions that have definitive answers, but aren't necessarily things that language models might be good at or might, know the answer to. And then they look at all of the generations that model produces for, those given questions. And then they only train the model on the correct ones. So they're training, how to reason, basically, how to generate, reasoning tokens.
Let me back up a second. What is the difference between ChatGPT, what we have, and I'm paying for today, this ChatGPT 4.0 generative AI, and this 401? Like, what's the significant difference? What's the advancement? It's doing this chain of thought reasoning based on a newer way that the models have been trained. But what's the significance of this advancement?
Yeah, so the significance of the advancement is that the models are better at reasoning through multi-step processes, and better at understanding what steps might be necessary for them to solve a given task if they're given that task. And that might seem kind of hand wavy, but to back up a little bit more, even more, just to say that ChatGPT is just the consumer-facing product. And that's just a way that people interface with the language model. And the language model underneath, it could be one model, it could be, several models, it could be one model that's calling other models. So, when we say ChatGPT, I think there's this tendency for us to like kind of hand wave that and be like, yeah, like ChatGPT, in the same way that we like hand wave like some consumer technology that we're really familiar with. But underneath that is actually a bunch of different language models, and each one might be trained in a slightly different way. And the big difference for this model is in the way that it was trained. And what they found out is essentially looking at human cognition patterns and saying, how does a person solve a problem? And in the same way that, if you give a person like a piece of paper with an incomplete sentence and you say like, hey, like, can you finish the rest of this sentence? And they're like, yeah, done. And they like finish it and give it back to you. But if you give them the same task and you say, hey, really read this sentence though, and like, what comes next? Well, what's like the next 10 lines in the story? Where does this go? Like, what about this sentence indicates that there's way more depth here that we need to explore, and like make a plan and then explore that. That's kind of the difference between the GPT-4o model that we had been very familiar with, and the GPT-4o1 preview.
Why is this? Why do we care? Why do we care that the model shows us how it's reasoning? What are some use cases that you see emerging from this that like makes your head explode, or is this just one of those point updates that
No. So we definitely need to look. I need to test it a little bit more and actually know like how well it's working, and I'm sure that's like a whole iterative process that is. It's not done with them releasing this. Like this is just sort of the beginning of things. But Gabe, I think is very. He's emphasizing this for its accuracy. Let me give you the hypey version of it, and maybe that makes it make like a little more sense.
Yeah, he keeps saying they claim to do this and they claim to do that. Tell me what's happening. Give me the future.
Right. He wants to be accurate. Right?
Tell me about the future. We don't fact check on this podcast.
So
Tell me what the future looks like.
It's going to kill us, right? This is how AI is going to do us. No, look, essentially the way that I've seen OpenAI kind of figure a lot of stuff out from the outside, right? I have no idea how things work inside of OpenAI, but they figured out that, you look at an LLM, it outputs stuff. It's sort of like this de-randomizer, statistical de-randomizer of like text, which is how I like to think about it. But what they figured out kind of early on and a lot faster than a lot of other people is just how valuable it is to find these different ways to build upon itself in this sort of recursive manner, right? So you get the sense that there's a lot of different prompts, queries, and actions that are being undertaken now whenever you actually run a query. It's not completely hidden. Like if you do go and click, like whenever it says that it's analyzing or that it's thinking or that it's whatever, you'll see that it's writing code, it's pulling stuff, it's sort of figuring out ways to kind of instrument some of its limited faculties in order to come up with a better solution. But that's been happening, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but since the release of GPT-4, like the basic GPT-4 is when I started to notice like it instrumenting different types of actions in order for like certain kinds of inference, right? So we would make fun of it because it was really bad at math. Not that I'm any good at math, but God, the stupid machine is bad at math. And in reality, that changed at some point, and what we noticed was, oh wait, it recognizes that there's a math problem or some kind of requirement here, and it decides, instead of trying to like, textually de-randomize its way to an answer, which is obviously not going to be accurate, it will write some Python code to do some calculations, then ingest that answer and then put it as part of the text. And that was like that was actually like a single action kind of simple version of what it's doing. What we've been seeing since like 4.0 came out is just a lot more emphasis on how do you deconstruct what you're being asked into a series of actions, then figure out what the best way to tackle each action is, then give you an answer along those lines. So it might be a little bit slower, but the quality of thinking that's going into it tends to produce better results. And it seems that, in true OpenAI fashion, like we got a sort of an inkling, a sip of that with 4. And what you're seeing is, oh no, they're trying to sort of amp that up to its nth degree. Like if I tell it, obviously I haven't tested this out, but in some theoretical nth state of how this works, if I go, hey, I want you to like create a blog that runs on Hugo and is written in Go and it does displace this, that, and the other. Theoretically, that's a complex set of ordered tasks that all are going to require different types of sort of thinking and approaches to it. What you're trying to build towards with something like 401 is, okay, this thing knows that it needs to deconstruct that into multiple problems, figure out better prompts for each one of them, go looking, maybe it'll need to look for information, maybe it's going to need to write some code, maybe it's going to need to ask you for, more details along the lines of what you want. It doesn't treat it as like a simple, you gave me a prompt, I gave you an answer. It knows that there are complex things and how to sort of tackle some of that.
Gabe, do we expect this to fix the hallucination problem, or is this on a path to fixing that? If one is correct that this deduction ability is going to increase accuracy, do we expect, is this the answer to the hallucination problem?
I don't know if it's the answer. It's definitely an answer to the hallucination problem. And it's definitely getting us closer to a model that waits to receive input and gather information before taking next steps. So, the model says, "Hey, I'm going to come up with a plan." And like, here's what that plan is, which is great. But like, you need to execute part one and then see what happened, because part one happens in the real world. You need to see like what the actual information state of the environment is. And then once it has that, it can update the plan. It can be like, "Oh, you know what? Wait, hold on. Part one is telling me something completely different than what my plan was set out to do. Time to rethink this."
Right. I want to pick your brain on how this affects cybersecurity. Is there like some obvious use cases that pops into your mind around threat intel, malware research, typical things built into security programs? Because I want to tie this into how does this 401 and this pathway affects the VC-funded ecosystem of AI-powered vendors, right? Like if those AI-powered vendors are building the wrapper to do this thinking, and this thinking is coming out of the models, like where does that go? But anyway, what's the first use case that pops into your mind from a cybersecurity perspective for this?
That was so charitable to the VCs, like it was ridiculous, right?
I'll let Gabe do the
I thought you guys wanted to talk about like ideas and philosophy, but no, it's always money. All right, fine. Yeah.
Tell me, what's the use case? What's the security use case that pops up in your head as obvious from this 401 advancement?
Burn some bridges, Gabe. Come on.
I think the first use case that pops into my mind is you drop this thing on a box and it doesn't have any prior information about where it is, and the instruction that you give it is, "Hey, figure out where you are, figure out what's connected, figure out how to move laterally." Like, that's not something that a language model on its own could do previously. And this is the type of advancement that gets you to the point where, you could drop this on unpatched system and say, "Hey, like, what is the system missing? Is it connected to anything it shouldn't be connected to? Like, are all the logs here that are supposed to be here?" Questions that we ask, our security analysts to go and like gopher for us. But, stuff that like people make, $1 million gizmos that are just like push button. "Hey, like, yeah, you can get all the logs from this machine by pressing this button." And it's like, maybe you don't need all the logs from that machine. Maybe you have like a very specific ask and you don't need to query this like super huge backend SQL database that exists. You can just kind of like drop this thing in there and be like, "Hey, like, I'm an admin, I'm gonna authenticate myself. Like, I have this very simple human language question that I need to ask." And then the model can go and execute for you.
You're describing the VC-funded startup ecosystem that I just ran into at Black Hat. With every vendor, in all seriousness, every vendor describing a product that does this. It has AI magic sprinkled in to do exactly this.
When do we believe what vendors fucking tell you they're selling? They're straight up lying. Like, they're straight up lying.
Look, a lot of people delude themselves into believing the AI hype and that they can do it right. But you know what? For us, it just might work.
But this is, I have an unpopular take that this is driven by buyers. That CEOs and buyers are talking to their peers and watching CNBC and just hearing this AI hype and going to their tech people and saying, "Where are we on AI? Why don't we have an AI agent doing all of this? Why aren't we automating everything?" So the buyers are driving this. Juan, I want to just pivot to you quickly on the question I just asked him. What's an obvious use case for you in, like, say you and your guys in the lab, threat intel folks, the folks listening to this podcast? What is an obvious use case for 401 that you're excited about?
I honestly just want to go back to a lot of the things that I had already. The thing with the way that these models get updated, which is both exciting and frustrating, is the underlying machinery keeps changing, sometimes without them really telling you. So it's very interesting to go back to problems that you were excited about when you were first told about this thing and didn't get good results, or something that you were the one helping me with a lot of the things, like when we started working on trying to use LLMs for like reversing, right? And the things that you were teaching me along the lines of like, well, map reduce, or like, why don't you approach it in this sort of recursive manner? They always gave me a sense that there was a great deal of promise, but I was missing all of this effort around building a harness that would take on a series of like atomic steps and then do this thing better for me. And in true, like almost like lazy ungratefulness about where we've gotten, that was a barrier, because it was essentially asking me to think on its behalf in order to get it to stop, like to think for me. And it was just like a little too much, right? Like I love it. If I had nothing else to do, that's what I would be like devoted to almost entirely, is sort of figuring out how to make it useful that way. But at the time it was just, it was 3 steps too far for the amount of time that I had for the kind of task that I wanted to do. So this is super exciting to go back and say, look, when we first got on this, I really wanted to be able to, for example, give it a reversing task, which is kind of my obsession with these things, and say, normally a skilled individual would analyze this assembly code, maybe go check the references for this thing, try to figure out in MSDN like what these APIs do. Maybe it'll come up with a bit of code that might actually emulate or manipulate some of this and give me a more substantiated answer about what it is that I'm asking. And all of that was within reach, but with a lot of like code and sweat still going into it. I literally want to go back to like the original examples that got me excited about this and just rerun them. Just start over. Just try again. Just go, look, originally I had thought, with some of the auto GPT and like some of these other like orchestration frameworks where you were like hoping that it would start doing action, and it kind of tried, it would start and then would just kind of flounder, it would get stuck, or it wouldn't really complete things. But like the idea of being able to start up a DigitalOcean droplet tomorrow and say, I want you to set up a full stack for Elasticsearch and a website and a thing and a database because I need to do X, and just go write a fucking script to do it and just have it reason through that orchestration in a way that's of a higher caliber than just it came up with a couple of scripts and commands and like it kind of floundered halfway through. I'm hoping that that's the kind of thing that will start to get unlocked.
Does that advance your art significantly, or is it just kicking the ball forward?
It doesn't kick. It's not kicking the ball forward. I think in many ways, things like this, they sound small, but what you're actually doing is massively increasing my capabilities as an individual. Before, in order to solve a problem like that, I would have needed to set a big chunk of time for me to relearn some new thing, and then I would try to do it. Then I would try to get AI to do it. That would fail. Then I would try to do it again. And then after like 3 hours, I'd give up and I'd call Silas and ask him how to do it. And then he would end up doing it for me.
Right. But in reality, it's a combination of a little bit of the AI, a lot of grunt work, a little bit more AI. And then the combination of that, at the end, you get a result. You're saying, hopefully, you get a result now that removes away all that crud, makes you a lot more efficient. It doesn't necessarily, remove people.
Nothing that we're hoping it's going to do is necessarily new. It's not necessarily things that couldn't be done before by people or by anybody. It's the idea that with $20 a month and 5 minutes, I can get like 70 to 80% of the way to a solved problem that would have been otherwise 3-4 hours, or just, you know what, I don't have the time, I'm not going to be able to tackle this. Right? Like those are the differentiators that in our industry, where you don't have enough people, you don't have the right talent, and like people are scattered and we don't have enough time. All the problems are just, mostly come down to, it's not that we don't have the skill, it's that it's displaced and it's busy. That is not a small thing.
Do you expect people to put this to go bug hunting? Hey, take a look at this code, find me vulnerable parts, tell me how you've thought about it, and maybe come up with a new way of designing an exploit for vulnerabilities. Do you expect, or have we seen any testing in that area, Gabe? And do you expect the use of these kinds of tools in that kind of vuln research area?
Yeah, there's been a lot of testing in that area, actually. And, the reason why is because in information security, we have really put vulnerabilities on a pedestal and we said, hey, like, this is how it happens, folks. This is how you get hacked.
It's not false either. Is that false? Get hacked by a
I think that
vulnerability
maybe
or a
they
gap
get more
or a
attention
weakness.
than they should. Vulnerabilities are like, okay, important piece of the puzzle, but like, come on, like, we go crazy for new vulnerabilities. Like, we love talking about them. And it's such a source of focus that it like makes us completely forget that like there's important operational parts of like ransomware
Go fix
organizations.
vulnerabilities,
Yeah,
yeah.
like go patch.
Exactly.
I hate saying it, but it's so true.
Exactly. Which comes back to finding more and more vulnerabilities. But anyway.
Right. So yeah, we have a huge focus on it, right? We're like way over rotated on it. And because we're so over rotated on it, everybody else who's outside of our industry looking in goes, oh man, like we really got to worry about these models being able to identify vulnerabilities. That's the most important thing we can focus on. And so they test it a lot. In this new release from OpenAI, they published this new system card, which basically describes kind of like all the risks associated with the model, what they tested, what they're worried about. And in that system card, you can go see it on OpenAI's website. It's a long PDF. But page 16, 4.2.1, observation of reward hacking on cybersecurity task. And what this was a test of how this model performed, trying to exploit a vulnerability in this particular like challenge setting that they had. And it was just a CTF, like very, very, basic CTF, exactly what they should be measuring. But they had an interesting finding, which was that the CTF had like a failure to load this Linux container. And so the model was attempting to access it. And it was like, I can't access the Linux container to solve this CTF. So what else is in this environment? And it found this API and it was like, I could launch a new container to solve the CTF. Like I should do that. Launched a new, completely went around the problem it was being given, launched a new container. And then because there was like a read permission that was inherited from launching this, I guess, it was able to print the CTF challenge. And so it solved the CTF in a completely roundabout way. Now,
which a human wouldn't be able to do though, right?
No, I mean, human could totally do this. This is like, system admin stuff, right? It's just like, I can like do this system admin thing and I can get the CTF, right?
Oh, I see. So it didn't do anything that a human wouldn't be able to do.
No, like everybody looked at this and they're like, oh my God, sandbox escape. And no, that's not what this is. Like the model is just doing like basic system admin stuff. It was clever. And it's really interesting to see it found a solution that we did not expect it to find. And by we, I mean like, AI researchers, not me. And what they said about this was that this model demonstrated planning and backtracking skills that have been bottlenecks for applying AI to offensive cybersecurity problems. We could say the same thing about defensive cybersecurity problems. So this is a really interesting finding. I think it's one that says, hey, like these models are getting better at problem solving. And that's something that we should be paying attention to in the information security space, because we have a lot of issues that are like bottlenecks for us, like Juan was just saying, that, require a little bit of complex thinking. Not that much. I mean, but
I can do it, so it can't be that bad.
You expect this to move the needle on ODE discovery and new classes of vulnerabilities?
No,
why are we even asking that question? Hold on.
You want to know why we're asking?
Why are you asking that question?
Because the only reason I don't think people are obsessing about that on security applications because it's somehow like that's how you get hacked. They're obsessing over it because they think of it like a fucking like lottery ticket. If I can suddenly get a machine that's gonna start fucking printing ODEs, then I'm gonna make a shit ton of money. Either in the supposed defense space, in the offensive selling space, in whatever. Like those are the easiest like monetizable like milestones that you can get out of this thing.
I mean, I listened to your last podcast. I was one of what I'm sure many listeners, and
17, the 17 listeners.
I seem to, recall when you're talking about the vulnerability space that, oh, there's only a few people that produce these. That's a huge bottleneck for us. But like, I don't know, there seem to be a lot of vulnerabilities out there. I don't see adversaries hurting for access. I see adversaries hurting for operationalization.
I think that's the same reason that I was sort of surprised that we're giving the VCs their due, as if the VCs know what the fuck is happening at all or care at all. Like they're not just sort of trying to like, dude, somebody bought Recorded Future for almost $3 billion. Clearly, people don't know what anything is worth.
Who bought Recorded Future?
MasterCard. I don't know. I don't even. The only reason I'm not going to go full bore on this is I don't want to insult MasterCard. But clearly people don't have any idea what any of this stuff is worth, and they're just, they're buying, selling, and investing on the basis of like ridiculous hype cycles. The same thing happens with the O-Day space. Our security is not an O-Day problem. You wish it were a fucking O-Day problem. It would mean that we had solved all of the real problems, and all that we have left are the unknown unknowns out there that might somehow shift the equation in ways we weren't expecting. That is not the problem at all. So that's not what we're talking about. Like, that's not the problem here.
I'm just trying to get to use cases, and I'm not saying that's the problem. I'm saying in the hands of bug bounty guys. Let's say you have a bug bounty crew and you guys are going hunting, and you get something to think for you and help you think deeper. I'm just trying to figure out different security use cases beyond your.
That for sure is going to be a use case. And frankly, I mean, you had a really great security conversation podcast back in the day. And forgive me, I cannot remember whose it was that was talking about having figured out how to instrument a lot of like the bug bounty sort of
shubs.
Yeah. So low hanging fruit discovery stuff. Like if those are, I think the greatest moments of opportunity is the same way that like, when the gig economy popped up with, fiber websites and stuff like that, like there's a lot of ways in which some simple automation and just understanding a certain problem space can make you a lot of money in a short window of opportunity when people haven't quite realized that the dollar cost versus effort disparity has shifted because of something. I think that you would get a similar equation when it comes to bug bounties where at some point, and maybe 401 is getting to that point, the effort versus payoff for a lot of the lower end bug bounty stuff is bound to, for some window, disproportionately favor the person that knows just enough about bug bounty and just enough about a model like 401 to get you very quickly through a lot of hoops and hopefully make you some bucks. But the exploit space is a lot more complicated, and it's not to say that it's not a worthwhile problem. It is, right? A lot of the secure by design stuff kind of seems to think that there's just like experts at not writing buggy code and exploitable code just everywhere. They were just hanging out and no one remembered to call them into the room until CISA got there and let them know that maybe those experts that were just out there having a smoke, doing nothing, could just walk in and fix it. Obviously, were that not to be the situation, something like this is going to be incredibly helpful. But that's when you get into the specifics, the guardrails, the implementations, the actual, like, the kind of work that folks at like Veracode have been doing for some time, where I am sure there's all kinds of verification and testing and looping through these things that, and God knows, fine tuning and training that I don't understand, that would have to go into making it a reliable thing, as opposed to being akin to fuzzing, where, yeah, it's helping me get there faster, but it gave me 142 false positives before we found that 143rd test case where, yeah, there was something really good. So
right. I think the application of this is important too, because like, let's take the example you just gave, which is fuzzing. Like, what are you fuzzing? Like an entire application, something that, like a company's entire deployment. Like, where do you start? That's kind of where, like, I think the language modeling is going to have the most impact. It's not on the tasks that are compute intensive. It's on the tasks that are, like cognitively intensive, or the ones that like we have to think about before we do. okay, here's an example. A bunch of companies right now are set up to run on CPU, not GPU. And what I mean by that is their entire tech stack is built around calculations and operations that take place on CPUs. They're not doing a bunch of floating point operations. They haven't taken the cognitive tasks and automated those. And increasingly, that's going to change. Like the company of the future, the next security startup, they're going to be running on GPUs, which means that they're going to be automating all of the cognitively intense tasks that they just do not have time for, or that they otherwise here's a list of all these endpoints. Where do I start? Like, what's the most lucrative one to start from? Hey, here's the data that came back from that test. Should I move on to the next one, or should I double down here? That's where the efficiency gain is. So I think people are they're still thinking about selling typewriters instead of selling fancy keyboards that don't make any sound when you hit the keys. But the task is still word processing. Guess what? Language models are really good at word processing. So,
I am one. I don't pay attention to all these point feature updates. Are there anything else coming from OpenAI competitors that we should be paying attention to? Is Anthropic doing anything interesting? Can you fill us in on what's happening? What are some feature updates coming?
You should be asking Gabe, frankly, because I'm realizing that despite my efforts to keep up with things, for example, Anthropic apparently got good for a while. I thought Claude was very unimpressive, and then now it turns out everybody's been using Claude for coding and whatnot, and I've just been missing out. Honestly, even from within OpenAI, have been dying to test their search GPT. But that's still in sort of preview. And the reason I'm dying to try it is I'm a big fan of, or have been a big fan of, Perplexity as a search replacement, in this post-Google world. And I really like it. However, I can tell that while they've figured out a lot about the search side of things and having citations and whatnot, you kind of get the sense that the model part of it is sort of very rudimentary. So I would love to have OpenAI be the one sort of implementing that and actually bringing all of the benefit of all the other stuff that they're building into it. But yeah, no, Gabe, you tell us what the hell, what are we missing out there, right? Last I saw was Llama 3.1, and I thought that was phenomenal. That's really cool. I don't know what else is going on.
Yeah, the Llama series of models is fantastic. You can run them on your laptop if you have the right quantization. You can just go download these things, plug them in, and run them on your GPU. And I think
slow down for people in the audience that don't know what Llama is. This is the Facebook open source. They have an open source vision for it, which is completely different from these private vendors. Maybe we should fill in on a bigger picture on what's happening.
Yeah. So big picture, there's two schools of thought for AI models essentially right now. There's the open source school of thought, and then there's the closed private model.
The VC funded. VC funded.
Yeah, the VC funded make your own model thing.
Which side are you on in this, by the way? Just as a quick aside, are you a proponent of the Zuck model of open sourcing this as kind of this is how we get leadership? Where do we get leadership as a?
Each kind of has its benefits. I think each has its own strategy too. So Toni Morrison wrote, when people tell you who they are, believe them the first time. These companies are not shy about explaining what their philosophy is. And if you look at the philosophy, you should believe it. It's not, there's a bunch that's marketing hype, but when somebody comes out and says, hey, we're trying to build an AI assistant, or we're trying to build artificial general intelligence, you have to kind of understand directionally what that means. It means that everybody at that company is working towards that goal. And these companies are 2,000, 3,000 people at these AI labs. It's not that big. OpenAI comes out and says, hey, we're trying to build the world's best assistant. That's the product, right? But the goal of the company is to make AGI. And so you can think about everything that they do is in service of that larger goal, including all the products they provide, Like ChatGPT, great way to source user data and understand how people are using the product to make the model better. Like a bunch of people realized they could use chain of thought in their prompts like years and years ago, and it made the models better. Or people realize like, hey, like I can create this prompt which is really helpful and I can share it with my friends. Like if you're one of these closed source companies, you're capitalizing on these advancements that happen in open source. And you're saying, hey, like, how do we bring this in and turn it into something that's either valuable for our long-term goal or valuable for our like short-term product offering? Product offerings for these companies also get derailed by things like, you know, hey, we need to have enterprise sales, and enterprise like has certain requirements like no data collection, or they like need to be able to manage users. Like there's
No
just
training
all
of
these things.
models on my data.
Yeah, no training on my data. And then you have open source, and open source is very different. And the bet there is really that you're going to grow the market so much that you're able to take advantage of externalities that happen when you grow the market. And like, let me just like, here's a tinfoil hat idea, right?
Oh, we love these.
Conspiracy Gabe
Come
is
on,
here.
it's about time. Get in here, Conspiracy Gabe.
Why is like Mark Zuckerberg, you know, pushing Meta to release all of these, you know, all these models open source? Like Llama, the Llama models, Llama 3.1 is good. When it released, it was state of the art. And everybody was like, oh, there's 3 of them. They're easy to use. You can deploy them. The only rules on them are like, don't exceed this many users in your user base, which is basically to keep like a company like Google from just, you know, like plopping it in their infrastructure or whatever. But like,
They need all the help they can get.
you know, Meta, like they know what a bot looks like online. They know what a person looks like online. They understand how these things are different. And in a world where everything is becoming AI generated slop on the internet, like what's the most valuable thing you could provide? And I think the answer is authenticity. Now that's my personal opinion. I think, you know, maybe we're just going to entertain
Meta
ourselves to
rebrands
death.
itself as the authenticity platform.
Well,
I mean,
I love the idea that they know what a bot, they do know what authentic behavior and a bot looks like, because frankly, they are to be believed. They're not like that. They don't like that's an insurmountable problem in a way that's why like all their trust and
I
safety.
think they do know how it works on their platform.
I think that they're pretty good at it compared to everybody else out there. Who's better positioned? Let me ask you that.
So
And
if
in
I'm
fairness,
Chinese
Facebook has done a lot of investment in product security, threat intelligence, security team. I mean, Facebook is a premium of.
No, they're
premium.
great. You know, in that capacity, in the threat intel side of things, they're great. I mean, in the, you know, being a person like larger sort of global citizenry kind of way, they're not. But threat intel, they're fantastic. Gabe, am I hearing you correctly? Like, am I understanding sort of where you're going with this? Maybe I'm putting 2 points together that I shouldn't. But when you talk about OpenAI and like, you know, every product is being built in the furtherance of this larger, absolutely insane, ridiculous sounding goal of like AGI. So ChatGPT is a way to like harvest authentic human interactions and try to understand how people are going to use the product. Is the corollary that Meta doesn't actually need that ChatGPT style product, that what they need is something else? And if so, like, well, what is Meta's goal in the AI space? Is it just an also ran, or like, you know, where the fuck are they going?
I mean, I'm guessing at this too, but my guess, and you know, talking to people who are, you know, a lot smarter than me and think about this a lot more deeply, the general consensus that I've been able to pull together is Meta is basically like building the entire market for AI. And then, you know, whatever their goal is to capitalize on that, I've got no idea. But the reason they're releasing these models is to let people like give people more opportunity to use them. And you know, like a really good small model running on your computer that you control, and like hell, maybe you can update, maybe you can train if like our GPUs keep getting better, or our training regimens become easier and faster to run. Like that's something that, you know, is like a lot of freedom. It's like giving somebody the internet and being like, hey, like here's this thing that's really good at answering all your questions, and it just runs on your box and it costs you electricity. Like, and there's no ads on it. Like,
That's the thing
that's
David
like a
Weston
bet
is
on
using to
people
make
being able
memes, right? It's like
Dave Weston's using like proprietary models to make memes for us. I mean, I don't know whether we should be calling him out on it or not, but those fucking pictures are phenomenal. Like the amount of amazing
it's
pictures.
Flux. What is Flux?
It's a modeled service that's image generation. I think it's the same people who did Stable Diffusion. Their website's a little suspect. Would not suggest you go visit it. Like, image generation is kind of a strange, like, it's a strange thing, because like text generation, nobody really cares. Like, you can be like, hey, like, write this in the style of Juan Andres, and like, you know, it'll be a little lengthy, but I don't think it's gonna. I don't think Juan's gonna be upset.
Lengthy
but
by
like,
design, you mean?
I can think of, like, you know, you could do a lot of image generation of other people that makes them upset. Maybe you like don't have that. You shouldn't be doing that image generation. Maybe like the stuff that you're doing.
That's already a lot of the issues you see with these, right? No. Like, there's a lot of like, no, there's like, you know, these like apps to like turn a normal picture into a nude picture. Like, there's a lot of like upsetting aspects of this that are currently already being misregulated, right? Like,
this shit has been on Snapchat for 5 years. You could swipe like this and get your face to look like a cat. Like, I mean, the technology to do this filtering has been there forever.
People are less upset about being turned into a cat than like being sort of.
No, I'm just talking about the availability of the underlying technology has been there. We act like this image generation that we're seeing out of Flux is so amazing. It's like Photoshop on steroids, right?
No. Come on, like there's a big difference, right? The effort that it would take for you to Photoshop yourself as an MMA fighter, in a
versus
convincing way. Versus Dave Weston generating 24 versions of you as an MMA fighter, all of them convincing in a matter of 5 minutes. Like, those are not small things. Moreover, if we want to get away from the joking end of it and like think about the societal impact of it, you just like a whole section of Fiverr just fell into the ocean. Right? Like, you just took away jobs from like a ton of random designers and stuff like that. That is no longer necessary. And it's to say, like, it's not like I'm lamenting this notion that we need to stay in the Stone Age with how we do things for the sake of people's jobs. I personally think what we're going to see, hopefully, is an up-leveling of artistry with this tool in hand. But in the meantime, you are causing a lot of societal turmoil, and those people don't necessarily know what the hell they're going to do.
I think
I just saw a Forbes piece on a guy who was collecting data at Disney to do. I mean, I don't know if it's how accurate it is, but that's kind of like the public reporting and the public scaremongering around some of this stuff. But I want to go back. I want to go back to open source versus closed source. And Juan, for you, I want to put your DC hat on. Is there a national security implication to this with U.S. having leadership over China in AI, which is obviously a larger part of the fight? And like, how do you see the open source versus closed source model tying into any of that?
So those are two big things, and I don't know how good our thinking around this is. At the same time, I don't know that I can accurately characterize what is happening in China as far as AI goes, because there's a ton of work happening over there. But yeah, there is a massive concern around who's going to, quote unquote, win the AI race, which, you know...
There's an argument that it's important for the U.S. to win the AI race.
Well, but...
The same way it was very important for the AI for the U.S. to win the computing race. I mean,
but I think the problem with those, it's just... Look, I don't disagree that we should somehow excel in the adoption of these technologies and figure out better ways to implement, use them, and so on, obviously. But I think discussing it as a race makes it sound like there's like a clear end goal and like a linear set of progress that we have to take on, which I don't think is an accurate way of looking at this. Like, we're basically injecting different modes of AI into whole different forms of production, civilization, thinking, and whatnot. And that's more of an emergent thing than it is like a linear thing.
No, I'm not making any of this up. I mean, the sanctions,
You're not making it up.
a lot of this China sanctions and so on is blocking NVIDIA from shipping advanced AI chips to China for this specific reason, because we're concerned
that
about.
doesn't mean the thinking is very sharp around it, right? Like, I think part of the issue here is we know this is something that matters.
Your phone is buzzing.
I don't know. Probably mine.
Put it on the ground.
You don't own me. Give me a second.
No, I know. It's just like
Close to the mouse, to the microphone. Okay, so the thinking around this, it's not necessarily very clear. Like, even the sanctions around the chips were kind of done in a stupid way. Like, it's so hard to do
the
something.
intent was clear, though.
Yeah, but who gives a shit about the intent when they're like, oh yeah, you can ship you can't ship the H1000s, but you can ship the other one that's kind of exactly the same and just missing like one tiny bit of like palladium on the side. You're like, you guys are, thank you for your great
I think you're
intent.
simplifying it. I think you're simplifying it when you say it's not just the palladium on the side. It's
No.
like,
It's more to say that the policy is just not flexible, nimble, or well-informed enough to be genuinely effective, even though the intent is clear and agreeable, right? We don't want to give China this disproportionate technological advantage when it comes to something that we're supposedly racing to try to achieve. Now, part of it is also the difficulty around defining something like this is we don't know what AI is actually going to do in any real useful fashion yet, like not in a very defined way. So how do you keep your adversary from reaching a goal you can't define faster than you can reach the goal you can't define? And that's sort of the difficulty there, because there are real concerns around how China wants to use AI and like things around surveillance, like the way that, what was it, Clearview? This company was being used around like the identification of like Uyghur minorities and like how that, goes into this sort of bizarro world of like social credit in China and whatnot. And for issues like that, you can get into this discussion about like G40 and Brad Smith sort of taking a seat on the board of this shady ass AI company, supposedly out of the UAE, but that's working with China. Like, there's all these ways in which you go, this is all shady, it's dirty, it's shitty, it's weird, and we're all super worried about it, but our fear doesn't seem to have a very concrete, like, defined body to it. It's just a vague fear. Like, Gabe, you can,
It's
call me out if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
right?
no, you're exact. You're on. Yeah, you're right. You don't win a race by trying to hobble your opponent. You win it by investing in yourself, right? Like, where is the U.S. investment in the AI space, and what are the goals of that investment?
All of that has been ceded to private enterprise, right?
As far I think as far as we can tell, and
what is it
enterprise
comparable in China, or is it being led by government there? Like, can you fill us in on what's going on there? In the same way I asked the question about what's happening, so nobody knows.
Private industry in China now? Like, when did that happen?
You guys didn't know, but I'm actually an expert on Chinese government investment strategies.
Dakota Carey, is that you? Or you?
Wait a second. Hold on, let me get him. Who's right over here?
Yeah.
No, I find it hard to believe that the government is not involved directly in the investment strategy.
Our CCP party representative asked us to go into this topic.
Well, no, the private side is actually more interesting, though, because you see these firms needing monster investment to like spend on GPUs, and and not to say nothing of like the power requirements and the rack and stack and the support, and like where are they getting that money from? Like, they're having to go to overseas investors because they're like, the U.S. investors are more kind of tapped out at this point. They're like, we need $100 billion. Who has that kind of money? You have to go to like other governments, essentially.
And there are national security implications there. I mean, that's a real topic coming out of Atlantic Council. I'm starting to see position papers on this stuff. One, is that something that's like, is that something we should be concerned about?
Let me stay on this for one more second.
Go.
If a government gives you $100 billion, where is that data center being built? Is it being built in the United States? Or is it being built overseas?
Why is that important?
Well, because that's the capability investment.
Right.
Like, you want to train a model, you need that data center. The location of that data center and like, who's operating it is quite important. Not,
Capability production being local, right? Like
right.
it's the different, like, I think for folks,
Wouldn't it be nice if we had TSMC in Arizona?
well, I
Like
mean,
that would
we'd
be
love to teleport them over here. And then honestly, people would probably stop giving a shit what happens to Taiwan. Not that I think that's the right approach to it. But yeah, I think Gabe's point about like capability building is meaningful, right? Like we're thinking about models the way, passersby think about exploits. You think the exploit is the most valuable part of it, rather than thinking that the exploit development capability is the important part of it. It's the same people who think of like exploits as cyber weapons and you're stockpiling them. You're like, no, that doesn't make any fucking sense. Like this thing doesn't, it has a shelf life, it has an applicability in context, and it won't matter in 3 months. But what matters is like I have, 30 ultra well qualified people who can rack up a new ODE in a matter of, hours, days, or weeks. And that's a similar thing with the models, right? Like to some extent, whatever it is that Zuckerberg is doing by releasing these llama models, which I wonder if that was even intentional to begin with, or like they leaked the first one and then they just like leaned into it, which, it's not a small thing. Like I think that's a pretty funny story that changes this whole game. But also it makes you realize, like, for us, the lay people that don't have a data center just sitting around, getting your hands on a well-trained model is amazing. But the true like power in the game is being able to train those models as much as needed, whenever needed, in whatever capacity, some genius comes up and says, oh, actually, if we train the model in this like slightly, left tilted way, then it's a much better one. Like you're going to need a data center, you're going to need the GPUs, you're going to need the expertise and the capability to train it. And so there is a lot to be said around that. I also think that for all of the Atlantic Council style thinking, which I think does fall prey to all this sort of like model fetishism and just sort of focusing on the wrong part of it, I'm not seeing enough discussions about power density. Not to like put my Vaclav Smil like hat on for 30 seconds, how the fuck do we think we're going to power these data centers indefinitely? Like that notion about like AGI coming around is so hilarious to me, because if you really are thinking about this like all destroying intelligence out there, what part of generative AI's emergent behavior solves global power crises such that we can just go on these GPU farms for every human need and problem without limit or concern? Like those are the really, like, that's where the San Francisco thinking kind of like falls, the Valley thinking falls sideways. So you go, you guys are living in this wonderful world of like stepping over the homeless people and just pretending everything works perfectly, and no one's sitting there doing the math going like, how the fuck are we supposed to pay for that?
Oh, how did this turn into an attack on my beautiful home city?
Go ahead.
How could it not? How could it not?
If you ask the true believers,
the acolytes, if you will.
Yeah, within the AI space, the folks who are, like accelerationists, they really believe in this stuff. If you ask them, they'll tell you that the reason why we need to get to AGI is to solve those problems. Like, oh, the energy density problem is too difficult for us mere humans. AGI is going to solve that. And that's why we need billions and billions of dollars in investment in this one company, because we're the best positioned company to solve this problem. That's the story. That's like the Silicon Valley, like.
But it's like, it's magical thinking. It's absolutely magic. Like there's a difference between emergent behavior and like magical thinking.
Well, now who's focusing too much on the models now? Okay, let me ask you this.
No.
The comparison within the AI space that people love to make is to the Manhattan Project, which is really problematic for a number of reasons. But like the point that they're trying to make is, hey, this technology is one, really important, like
sure,
the Manhattan Project, and two, it's going to require a lot of like government investment, and like it's going to require like these like big thinking style projects. And like that I think is directionally correct for how we think about like how does the government interact with this space. Sure. Like what, like when somebody says like, oh, what's the AI strategy of the White House? I'm kind of like, and then they release it and it's like, well, models shouldn't do this and models shouldn't do that. And it's kind of like, well, like, what's the actual strategy? Like, what's the strategy of the government to like make these models like more available, or to make these models, like safer, or to build infrastructure that can support new technology? That's the question that I'm like, I kind of wish more people engaged with. And just about the risks. I had a conversation in Vegas with a guy who came up to me and he was like, hey, I'm from the government. This is where I work. And I was like, cool, whatever. And he said, people are telling me that the thing I should really worry about is like AI models being able to give people instructions for how to make a nuclear weapon. And I was like, well, like AQ Khan gave a lot of people instructions for how to make a nuclear weapon. Like, I don't know if he's like, yeah, but like the AI model could do it. And I asked him, I was like, hey, like, okay, let's say that's true. It's not, but like, let's say it's true, right? And an AI model could give you like step-by-step instructions to make a nuclear weapon. Like,
but it's not true.
It's not, but like, let's assume in this world that we have a model that can do that.
Because that's not this world.
Would it be the open
It's not,
source
but wait, let me finish. Okay.
To be clear, it's not.
Stop fucking with him.
Okay, you have that, right? Like, that's actually not the limiting factor to creating a nuclear weapon. It turns out that like it takes massive infrastructure investments and enriching uranium and like all these other things need to happen for you to be able to do that. And it's not a small task and it's not easy to hide. And it turns out like we monitor that. So I asked this guy, I was like, hey, like, is that actually a risk considering all of this?
Right.
And he looks at me, he's like, yeah, I guess not, but like, what if it could? And I'm just like, come on, man, like we got
what if it were?
We need to be having a different conversation about like the risks associated with these things.
I think the problem there is actually that we want thought leadership from the White House and other places, when in reality, like, at least looking at how things have worked with security policy, they don't come up with it. They hopefully get a bunch of smart people in a room, and then sometimes I'll sneak into the room as well, and then you come up with something. But like, no, we shouldn't be looking to the White House and those folks to come up with like visionary AI policy. People need to start telling them what AI visionary policy would look like. And frankly, I don't think I've heard much of a proposal for that. But I'm sure that people in the White House would be relieved if somebody came and said, this is what you guys should be doing. And it isn't just like setting up a church tent in front of like OpenAI's headquarters and praying to the forthcoming AGI.
You come visit me in San Francisco and throw a rock and we'll hit a visionary AI thought leader, okay?
Every block on every
block.
Yeah, an AI visionary thought leader in every pot. That's what I'm proposing here in San Francisco.
We're going off on some tangents, and I want to touch some tangential points, which is government. You're talking about White House doesn't have a policy. What are we expecting? Like, what do we want? One, and how does this all shake out as it relates to regulation and government regulations around this? Keeping in mind the Europeans as well have their own take, a different take on all of this. Like, where do you see it shaking out?
Well, the Europeans have completely shot themselves in the foot on this over privacy, and
surprise!
In a way that is like both hilarious and kind of concerning, because it's like, is there another Dark Ages heading for the European continent? Like, this is important new technology. I'm not saying it's gonna change everything, but like, hey,
are they being left behind?
Yeah,
they're not being left behind.
They're opting out.
They've decided to just like leave themselves cast away behind.
They're smoking a cigarette like while everybody's running a race, and they're like can't be bothered. Sorry.
Oh, this privacy.
Ooh, thank God I have my privacy.
So privacy.
Don't be making fun of privacy rights and
No, we're making fun of the
Europeans have done a lot. The Europeans have done a lot for us. Thank God for the Europeans. I have USB-C on my phone.
What the fuck are you talking about? Have you surfed a website lately?
I
have USB-C on my iPhone.
Thank God for losing 30% of all screen real estate while browsing, so the Europeans can get a warm and fuzzy about privacy.
It's true.
Delightful.
This is true,
Like,
but
let's-
Gabe, finish your point. Finish your point.
Okay, so let's like take Europe out of the equation because they're not making
They're
an
smoking
investment in
cigarettes.
this.
Let's just forget
It's a
about them.
great
They don't
line.
exist.
Well, but yeah, like what does infrastructure planning look like for this? Well, it looks like saying, hey, it seems that this particular like silicon development process is gonna be really important to the economy in the future. So maybe we should get good at that. And to get good at that, maybe we need to like make some big strategic investments on the same scale of like, hey, where are we building our next aircraft carrier? Are we building aircraft carriers? Like that's kind of like the type of strategic thinking that I think is going to be important from the government and regulatory side. It's like, how do we make it possible to like invest in tech so that it's not just a bunch of like Silicon Valley, like VCs pouring like a couple $1 billion and then expecting to get like instantaneous returns, right? Like this is like if you wanted to invest in computers in the 1990s, it'd be like, hey, like to Juan's point about education, like yeah, like understanding like how to make silicon chips is hard. That's hard science, and that's like something that needs to be invested in from an education standpoint. I think that like we don't even need to talk, like private industry might have a vision for what the future looks like, but from the perspective of, hey, these technologies are important, we should probably be leading in them. It's like the infrastructure that we need to build is pretty well known. It's just like costly, and it's hard to convince people of it too, because that's the other thing is, a lot of folks are really bought into this, but most people aren't. This like doesn't impact their lives, and the way it's being productized right now is to abstract away the model, and this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, and just like focus on the product. Hey, ChatGPT is better now than it used to be. Like, aren't you so happy that you're, a customer of it? Like, in the same way that Apple's like, this iPhone is the best iPhone we've released yet. And that's true. But also, it's like they release an iPhone every year. Like, and I'm going to buy it.
Dude, I just pre-ordered it. Do you mind like not shitting on it? Like,
buy a couple of extras. Can we get through this AI talk without talking about Apple Intelligence? The device makers are now hyping AI, and AI on the iPhone is going to be amazing. Like, listen, I've been using Siri for a long time. I expect a Siri on steroids that does a lot more amazing things, that proactively does things for me. All this stuff is fascinating, important stuff, all happening on device with, all kinds of computing power. Are we excited about what's happening there? And are there real security privacy implications we should be worried about? Or are we privacy people always in the way?
I think that, I'm excited for it, but actually mostly excited because of just how awful Google Assistant and Siri have become. Like they are like wooden spoons at this point, and
they are.
I ask Siri for something and it gets it wrong 9 times out of 10, and I can feel its action gap with the other things that I'm using every day, and it's like distressing and disappointing. So I'm
but
excited.
you can imagine the ability, right?
I'm excited for the new stuff. At the same time, I don't know that the privacy side of it is purely a privacy concern. I think we're getting to a point where we have to handle the effects of uncanniness on our willingness to use technology.
Explain that.
Well, think about this. Like, if you've ever Googled for something embarrassing, like a medical procedure or something where you like, you kind of have a little bit of apprehension.
Some of the search terms.
Yeah, you have a little bit of apprehension about looking something up that feels like a little touchy, right? What is the psychological experience around forming that conversationally at something like an AI assistant? And, from a privacy standpoint, it's pretty much the same thing. It's you from your IP on your computer asking about, whatever your weird mole is. But from an experiential standpoint, it feels very different.
And especially when that information is being used to train the model
right,
for
right.
all future answers, right?
But it's not like it isn't without realistic concern, but also it's a weird experience.
I get it.
Right? Like, it's just, so you kind of have to account for some of that. And I think I appreciate that Apple is leaning so far forward into it, because something that tends to happen with these pseudo-paradigmatic changes in technology is you tend to leave all those concerns behind, the same way we're like leaving all the like poor people of the gig economy behind and like all that stuff, to go, this is so important, it's so groundbreaking, it's so changing the world, man, that like, screw those things, we'll come back to them later. So it's nice to see Apple kind of trying to go, hey, Siri sucks, we have to find a way around like improving this, but how do we do that without like giving up the game completely? And the real question here is going to be, have they been able to do it effectively? Like, does this work well? Or, am I hitting that button? It takes 45 seconds. It comes back with the wrong answer. It asks me, just for like telling it to set a timer, it's going to ask me to contact OpenAI's servers. Okay, clearly we missed the mark. But if they can nail it, okay.
Right. It sounds like somebody didn't watch the full keynote, because if you had,
well, that's why we have you here.
Dude, I couldn't help it. I like needed to watch it. I had it up like on side screen while I was working. But yeah, no, a lot of the models.
Tell the people about the keynote. What did you see?
Okay,
Tell us.
A lot of the models that Apple are using are actually running on their own infrastructure or running locally on the phone, which is crazy, because when you think about it, Apple owns all the physics of the interactions that happen on their devices, right? Like how they're made, the software that's running on them, like the entire stack, which means that when you're plugging an AI model into that, you can really pick like, where are we going to slot this in? What's the fastest possible response time we can get running this on device without making an external call? Which like Siri is calling out to iCloud. It's slow, and
right.
Like sometimes like I'll be like hey, like turn on the lights, and then I'll wait and I'll be like, I'm just gonna get the switch myself because this is taking too long. I am so excited for a world in which I can provide my, like digital assistant with a few different questions or a few different like requests in the same thing. Like, hey, lock the doors, turn off the lights, open the garage. And it just does all those things. And then I think to your point about user privacy, I struggle with this so much because when I ask like my sister about privacy, she's just like, I do not care. Like, I don't care, nerd. Stop talking to me about this. She'll say that to me. It'd be very hurtful, but she'll do it. And it really reminds
everybody
me.
cares until, like, as David Jacoby used to say at all this sass. Yeah. Until what? Until the dick pic appears. Yeah.
But like that. I think we're approaching a world in which we're going to be more generous and forgiving with each other for embarrassing things that happen to each other.
What internet are you?
You see this all the time where like somebody's like sharing a video and then like somebody in the room is like, oh, like, this is the worst day of that person's life. And you're like, I remember a time in like 2005 where nobody would have said that. They would have just been like, look at this joker. And now there's like this realization that like this could happen to anybody. It's actually kind of scary.
But it's
Gen Z is like, I don't want to be online. I don't want to be on Facebook. Like, I see what's happened with that. Like, I'm going to like not share as much. And like, yeah, I think there's a possibility that the world will be more forgiving. But
there's what the fuck universe are
people
you
don't care about
in?
Privacy.
I disagree with you.
They don't care about privacy, but they love watching somebody fall. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I think as a society, this kind of normalization of not caring about privacy is just scary at another level. One of the last things on the Apple thing is that they have this Apple Private Compute, and the weird thing is that nobody knows how it works. But they've explicitly said that whatever can't be computed on device will be passed over to our private cloud, Google Cloud Compute, blah blah, whatever it is. Nobody knows how it works. Are we entirely trusting Apple to get that part right, the security part of passing something to a private cloud off device?
I can look it up right now. Let me just get my keyboard really quickly.
No keyboard. No clicking of keyboard.
Absolutely not. Look, I don't see why not. Like, if you think about it, all you have to do, well, this is over.
I can't wait to hear this hand wave.
All you have to do.
All you got to do. This is really easy, folks.
This is real simple. Real simple, folks. No, look, all we're talking about here is being explicit about what and when, right? Like, there's no privacy violation necessarily when Siri goes, for that request that I understood to be this, I need to contact this thing. Is that okay? And like, I think if you lean into like aggressive consent, there really isn't much to fuck up. Short of them, not doing what they said they were going to do, which is a different problem altogether.
Can I turn it off? Is it going to be on by default? Can I turn it off? Those are going to be some questions for some high-risk people to worry about. Right?
I would imagine that has to be an option, even for the sake of cost cutting on their part, right? Like, just, at some point, every request is going to cost them something.
We're at an hour and 15 minutes in, and we're going to wrap up quickly with two quick previews of your respective talks. I'll start with you, Gabe. LabsCon is next week. A lot of the listeners here are probably going to be coming into LabsCon to check out. What should they be looking out for from you?
Yeah, so I'll be giving a talk on a novel, attack adversary simulation against a retrieval augmented generation system. So these are very common. Why should we care? Yeah, so retrieval augmented generation systems are really common. Everybody is using them as part of their tech stack for generative AI, especially where it comes, especially where you come into contact with customers and policies that your company needs to be following. That's probably the most boring way I could use of describing it. But the interesting thing is kind of like what lies beneath those systems, and I'll be diving into that during the talk. I'll kind of be explaining that, and then I'll be showing this like kind of cheeky, mostly benign, but potentially interesting attack against that system, and kind of to say like, hey, if you understand how these work, then it's much easier to manipulate the information space and as it's presented to users. And that's gonna be my presentation.
You also have a workshop, a free workshop, where hopefully you'll be showing folks some non-OpenAI looking things.
I love giving free workshops. It's not even that much work to put them together either. They're really easy, it turns out. No, I am scrambling right now to finish up my workshop.
And a lot of folks are looking out for it, so the pressure is on.
Oh, great. Well, all 17 of you are welcome to attend. I think you'll all fit in the same room. But the workshop is going to be on kind of a different topic, but how you leverage LLMs to do some of the threat intelligence work that otherwise would require analysts to look at documents.
Use 401.
Just 401. That's it. Just use 401.
No, we're not even using that one. That model's too expensive. I'm going to use a really dumb model, and I'm going to be like, this is as bad as it gets, but like it's going to be very it's going to be fun. It's going to be a good workshop.
Juanito, there is no abstract for your keynote day presentation.
No slides either yet.
Give me the teaser quickly.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I have a concept of a presentation.
I have a concept of a presentation.
No, it's not so much that as frankly, I feel like I need to have like a tough love conversation with my own industry.
What are you looking forward to the most at LabsCon?
Look, dude, I try to be as honest as possible on this podcast. On some level, I'm looking forward to it being over, which is a terrible thing to say, but like No, this is a lot of work for a lot of us, and it's all I've been able to think about for weeks and months.
And the work has been done for like 3 weeks. Come on.
Yeah, because you're not speaking.
This guy's not even doing a workshop, Ryan. What's going on? He's working so hard.
On some level, I'm looking forward to getting back to research, but as far as LabsCon goes, like there's a bunch of amazing talks, but I'm mostly looking forward to the unexpected things that happen when you put that group of people together, and there's no predicting that part, right? Like I want to see what people's costumes are going to be for the meme warfare gala part. party. I want to see sort of what, unexpected friendships emerge and projects come out of it. Like the amount of folks, like people have started companies coming out of LabsCon, and like there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening that makes it nowhere onto the agenda. So that's what I'm really looking forward to. In the meantime, I expect to be very surprised by, whatever A game it is folks are going to bring for it.
If you're coming to LabsCon, I'm mostly looking forward to see how many people show up on Friday morning at 5 o'clock for a camelback hike.
Oh, that's right.
We're doing it again. So
yes.
be ready.
I believe you.
This is such a good hike. Everybody should go on this.
Get the fuck
Thank you,
out of here.
guys. I'll see you both next week.
Bye, guys.
See you next week.